There's a deadly illness killing men. It's not cancer. It's not diabetes. And it's not heart disease. It's suicide. Britain has a male suicide crisis. As the biggest killer of men under 50, why do so many men feel it's the only way out? Mental health is in the news, and there's a big focus on men. Male suicide has reached its highest level since the early 1980s.
We can all play our part by talking and listening to each other and helping each other find support.
Let's get our heads together and change the conversation on mental health.
The Princes are among many high-profile people talking about it, but the subject of suicide is still difficult for some. In London, the charity CLASP, the Counselling Life Advice Suicide Prevention, is holding a sponsored walk through the streets of the capital. It's being attended by those who've been affected by suicide.
Suicide is an extremely complex thing to try to understand. It's Mental Health Awareness Week, and here in London they're raising awareness of suicide prevention. I want to find out why suicide is so devastating for men and what's being done to try to reduce the numbers.
Many of those here today have personal reasons for walking. Kenny Johnston tried to take his own life after a long battle with his mortgage company over delays to his payments.
What I went through was this feeling of inadequacy and not having it in words or in context to exactly explain what I was thinking or how I was feeling and the uselessness of it all. And that pressure of feeling so useless seemed to add more and more into the realisation that suicide was the best option. 2 days before my suicide attempt, I sat there on my sofa with my flatmate sitting opposite me, unaware that I was writing emails to send 2 days later to my ex-partner, to my flatmate, and even a letter to my own mother explaining my suicide. And the sad thing about it, in attempting suicide, I've found that more family and friends that I knew prior to that day that I attempted suicide are not talking to me now than prior to it. They view my actions as me being selfish, and they don't know themselves how to engage with me.
By sharing his story, Kenny hopes to help other men. Of all the suicides recorded across England and Wales, men are 3 times more likely to take their own lives than women. The southwest of England is above the English average. So I've come to Devon to meet the relatives of men who've ended their lives by suicide. In 2010, Alison Hill's brother Pete took his own life.
Hi Alison, how are you?
He was 24. She now runs Pete's Dragons, a charity that supports bereaved families.
Pete was really quiet, really shy, just struggled to find his place in groups of people, and just used to, at family parties and things like that, just used to stand on the sidelines and laugh at whatever I was doing, whatever I was saying. I went back through his Facebook account the other night. I don't know why. I just, I think I was looking through my friends list for somebody, and he was there, which I thought I'd shut down his Facebook, but obviously I hadn't. And I went back through his Facebook just for the few weeks leading up to. And now, doing what I do every day and working in what I work in and hearing the stories that I hear, I would have known with the things that he was posting. I just thought he was a bit low, a bit fed up with life, not earning as much as he'd like, split up with his girlfriend, life wasn't where he had expected it to be at 24. So we knew that he was low, a bit sad, but that's all we knew. He didn't. It wasn't really obvious to the untrained eye. It wasn't obvious at all how sad he was. When he was missing, I was trying to ring him, and the inquest revealed that he would have been alive for some of those phone calls. Why didn't he pick up the phone? Why didn't he pick up the phone? Was I not a good enough sister? Did I fail him in some way? So there's the stuff that you internalise. I could have, should have, would have done better. I looked for people to blame because that would be easier than blaming myself. So what did that person do? How did they contribute? What difference would that have made?
Do you ever wonder what he would be doing now? Either from a work or way of living?
Wow. I think he'd be married with 2 very cute children, and that he would be happy. Yeah.
That stood on his grandma's picnic table with his bother boots on. I think that was taken on Instow Beach.
Paul Stevens lost his son Dan, who was 22.
We went to Old Trafford because we both support Man United, and it was his birthday treat. So we had a VIP day where we had the fancy meal and met some of the players. And when we left to leave, we left him in the shop. And I can remember going to the till and paying for something, and he'd gone off shopping. And I walked back round the corner and I stood watching him, and he didn't know I was looking at him. I don't know, it was almost as if we knew something was going to happen in a way. We got a knock on the door, and I'd been trying to get hold of him. It was my daughter's 24th birthday, so we had a house full of people. And I answered the door, and we were given the details of where he was now, and off they went. That was it from the police. They were gone. Because I would wake up every morning, and the first image I would get would be my lad in his coffin, and it would be so vivid, and I could remember. It was almost like I could smell the room. I'd sort of wake up and it'd be like, oh, and you'd remember it, because when you've been asleep, you forget about everything, and then you wake up and you remember it's happened, especially just after. And I would, I knew after a while that I had to replace that image. So I would wake up every morning and think something good about him, somewhere we went, something we did.
Really emotional talking to Paul and Alison. But why is suicide the biggest killer of men under 50? And what is it that makes men at such high risk?
It is still the case that the type of men we think die by suicide are unwell. The disturbed, the unlucky, or those who stumble at life's biggest hurdles but are too weak to get back up.
From Weston-super-Mare to Bath, BBC Radio Bristol.
In Bristol, research is being done into the complex reasons behind suicide. Why do more men than women take their own lives? Caroline Coope believes how men see themselves plays an important role.
On that level, I think it's just about the fact that their identity is so bound up in what they do and what they achieve and providing for their family, I'd say. I'm sure you're aware suicide and the causes are very complex. I doubt there is ever really only one thing, except occasionally, you can see that it might be a response to something bad that happens in life.
Alice Cole-King is a psychiatrist. She thinks men still struggle with expressing their emotions.
There is still a huge amount of stigma. And actually stigma is killing people. Because stigma stops people admitting to themselves that they're struggling. And this is particularly the case with men. And it stops them seeking the help and support they need. But actually if they do end up seeing a health professional, stigma can perhaps stop that health professional asking. It may be in the case perhaps with a general practitioner, where the GP might have known that man for a period of time and doesn't like to bring up the topic of suicide. Or it could be that actually they don't know the patient and they're seeing them for the first time, but we're so aware of the stigma that it's hard to broach the subject.
General practitioners tend to better communicate with people at their own class level. So if you get a highly educated person going in to talk about something, they speak the same language almost. But if you get somebody who's perhaps not as educated as the GP, which it's hard to be as educated as a GP, they probably speak a slightly different language, and I suspect the communication is not easy.
Most GPs do not have training specifically in suicide prevention.
And GPs themselves agree that they don't get enough training. In a statement, they told me more training is needed and that the 10-minute slots given to patients just aren't long enough to diagnose and recommend treatments for complex mental health illnesses. That's if men even go to a GP.
According to the Samaritans, only a third of men who are feeling suicidal ever go and see a GP or someone in statutory services, i.e. those provided by the government.
It's a staggering statistic. Of all the men that take their own lives, 2/3 have never spoken to anyone in a professional caring role. So, where do they go for help? This is Bridgend in Wales. According to the latest figures from the Office of National Statistics, Wales had the biggest increase of suicides in the UK. And the town's hit the headlines before.
In 2007, there was a spate of suicides here. Over 76 people took their lives between 2007 and 2009. A large proportion of those were men. So after 10 years, what support do local men have now?
They come here to get out, to do something and feel valued.
Looking good, Ron. Oh, yeah. I can see you get an Oscar for that now. That's right, yeah.
Men's sheds are workshops where men can turn up and make stuff. They're run by volunteers. The Squirrel's Nest in Bridgend was the first shed in Wales. Robert Vistiner helped set it up.
But no one is ever asked, why are you here? What's your problem? What's wrong with you? That never happens. But inevitably, someone's personal story usually comes out.
A lot of men are lonely. There's a hell of a lot of men lonely. My son found me, my eldest son, and I was watching my paramedics putting needles in my arms because I'd planned it because I knew that he'd be out. I thought he was out all night. And my youngest was away up his friends, and my daughter was she was somewhere else, so I had the house to myself then. So that's why I planned it. I went to town, had a couple of drinks, come back, and that was it.
What led you to that point?
loneliness, uselessness.
Glenn comes to the sheds as a way to cope with his depression.
It gives you a reason, you know, you need that reason, but it's kept me alive, but I still go back to an empty place, you know. So it's just a breather every day.
Men here talk shoulder to shoulder, so you could have two men working on different projects, but they're, if you like, stood next to each other, shoulder to shoulder. And then they might start talking, you know, they will have built a relationship, so they're already in a safe space, they feel comfortable here, it's their space. They probably will have gotten to know the person that's next to them, so they'll know a little bit about them. So if they have an issue or something, they might actually feel comfortable to say to the man next to them, oh, this is a problem I have, or this is how I'm feeling. I see a lot of advice and camaraderie going on here. You know, someone will inevitably have gone through something that someone else is going through and say, well, this is what I did and this is how I felt. You know, it's run by, you know, if you're going to go there, you think, actually, this shed is run by men who are like me, who understand me, and they're doing this for the benefit of everyone.
It was really interesting spending time with the men this morning. They just that whole environment gives them that real social space that they're looking for. You know, what struck me was the chap who said it gives them a real sense of purpose to get up in the morning and go there, and it's a real safe space for him.
The more people I speak to, people like Alison from Pete's Dragons and Kenny from Clasp, and Rob and the men at the sheds, the more it's clear. Volunteers play a vital role in suicide prevention, but why should men have to rely on the voluntary sector? Aren't mental health services supposed to be stepping in here?
Theresa May was speaking at a conference on mental health in Westminster.
I want us to employ the power of government as a force for good to transform the way we deal with mental health problems, right across society and at every stage of life.
There's still a huge stigma attached to mental health here in the United Kingdom.
Theresa May has announced an extra £1 billion for mental health services over the next 5 years. And now male suicide is on the national agenda. The government does have a national suicide prevention strategy, and local authorities and mental health trusts are supposed to implement it. In January this year, the Health Select Committee reported back on the government's plans. They criticised the lack of action. Sarah Wollaston chaired the sessions.
The suicide prevention strategy is essentially a sound strategy. There's wide consensus about that. The difficulty is with implementation. So the plans are good. It's making sure that they're put into place consistently around the country. That's where we heard evidence from all of our witnesses that we wanted the government to focus.
So what do mental health trusts have to say?
I can understand what Sarah means. There is often a problem with lots of strategies and initiatives, whatever they happen to be, in this case it's suicide prevention, in terms of implementation. Strategies can look great on the shelf and can be written very nicely, lovely documents or great online things. Reaching men who are at risk of suicide is a tough call, really. There's a whole group of people out there, beyond people who are receipt of mental health care, that could be, that require input. So any strategy has to be a broader community-based strategy. So for us, we've been very clear. We link regularly with those individuals. We have good relationships, direct relationships with the leads in each of our 6 local authorities we work with.
How engaged are local authorities in this, in your experience, or some of the evidence?
It varies. So some are very well engaged, and others, as you say, still haven't even got round to producing a suicide prevention plan. We felt that every area should have a suicide prevention plan, and that should be examined to make sure it's a good suicide prevention plan, but crucially, we need to have a focus on implementing it as well.
Would you say that the actual biggest challenge with suicide prevention is implementation?
Yes, so some of the things have been implemented already, But there are things that we need a bigger push, so we need to train all GPs. And that's not necessarily just financial issue, but it's time commitment from GPs. What might be useful is that someone does provide that leadership at the regional level, in a sense of just asking for compliance, or at least asking for action plans back.
Public health budgets are under enormous pressure, and the funding that is going into the suicide prevention strategy isn't coming on board until next year. It's a relatively small resource, and it looks as if that will be going in through the NHS route. And so we've always seen this, we do know there needs to be much greater join up about how the available resources are pooled and spent in the best way for that local community. And sometimes that will mean that money being channeled in through local authorities.
There was a talk in 5-year forward view that there will be suicide prevention money allocated, and if that's the case, my worry is that if it does go into the NHS budget, they'll say it's in the baseline, and therefore it's very hard to find that baseline. My preference would be to fund either local authority or local authority with a condition to commission voluntary sector to deliver a suicide prevention plan.
But there are no such conditions in those plans. Marie Ash, a volunteer who tries to get everyone to work together, says without guaranteed funding for charities, they'll just disappear.
For too long, mental health, suicide prevention, all those things have been underfunded. They need to be funded so that they know that they have X amount of money each year, because there's nothing worse than having a service that is there, so like a community organisation like the Men in Sheds, that's really working well, and then if they lose part of their, other funding from outside, whether it's lottery or whatever it is, that's it closes down. What happens to those people? They're already battling some of these feelings, and then the one thing that maybe is keeping them stable and alive is just dropped.
So is there a case to say that local charities should be funded by the government?
They can deliver fantastic value, and some of them don't need a lot of money, but they do need, for example, very often support with starting up and making sure that they're just not having to go from one very short-term budget to another, so providing some of that continuity of funding and long-term funding to allow them to, for example, to maintain their premises. So yes, to top up their funding from other resources in the voluntary sector, but the government, I think, does have a role in making sure that they have some baseline funding.
The government does provide some baseline funding. It's about £2 million a year, but that's for all health-related charities. I contacted Public Health England, the Department of Health and the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt. I asked them to talk about funding for mental health charities. All said they were unavailable to take part in this film. We know 2/3 of men don't engage in services, and there's no new money for the voluntary sector. As men, we're a complete person, but the services we use are broken up.
Before we begin the walk, we've got a really amazing lineup, like better than Glastonbury. No, seriously, I mean, really, really inspiring people that you're going to hear from today.
Back in 2014, Johnny Benjamin tried to take his own life, but was saved by a stranger.
Looking for a man that changed my life. I'm so grateful to him for stopping and talking. It really was the moment that my recovery started.
So, we're in the last mile of the London Marathon.
Oh my God, what an amazing...
He ran the 2017 London Marathon with Neil Laybourne. He was the stranger who saved him. Johnny is now a mental health campaigner and thinks the whole system needs to change.
The voluntary sector is picking up most of the work, to be honest. The state of the mental health system in this country is appalling. It's really appalling. So many cuts, such a lack of staff. resources are being lost all the time. So when people do ask for help, if they ask for help, then it's not there usually, or you have to wait 6 months, a year, 18 months, which is just unacceptable. You know, if you broke a bone in your body and they said, oh sorry, you've got to wait a year for physiotherapy, it wouldn't happen. But it does when it comes to, you know, mental health issues. People are expected to wait for, up to 2 years in some cases, which is just, you know, if you're struggling, you need help there and then. It's just not good enough.
We need to get talking more about this. People don't realise sometimes how difficult it is to open up, but if we make it as normal as possible to speak up about these things, we're going to make such progress.
Having spoken to volunteers, to professionals and to sadly those who've tried to take their own lives, what is clear is there needs to be a fundamental rethink of suicide prevention with a focus on men in particular. Until then, it's volunteer groups who continue to save men's lives and support the families left behind.
The words are poignant and the emotions deep. But these memorials will be just that until we find a better system.
Dear friend, we do not know you, you do not know us.
We care because, like you, we were struggling to stay alive.
We attempted suicide. We went to A&E, were referred to the crisis team or admitted to hospital after attempting suicide.
And we have survived. We've done more than survive. We have found the courage to live again.
We survived.
We want you to get through this too.
You are not beyond help.
You are not beyond help.
We have lived and loved again.
We believe you can too.
With love.
With love.
With love, the letter of hope.